Did you know that on April 13th, 1970, the crew of Apollo 13 faced an unimaginable crisis 200,000 miles from Earth? In the middle of their mission to the moon, an oxygen tank exploded, crippling their spacecraft. Suddenly, Jim Lovell, Fred Hayes, and Jack Swigert were trapped in a damaged vessel, fighting to survive with limited oxygen, dwindling power, and freezing temperatures. What would you do if you were 200,000 miles from home and your ride just blew up? This is the real story of Apollo 13. Okay, every hero has an origin story, and our Apollo 13 astronauts are no exception. Let's start with Jim Lovell. Before he was Commander Lovell, he was just Jim, a kid from Cleveland who turned his eyes skyward and dreamed of adventure. From the Naval Academy to test pilots to astronaut, Lovell faced setbacks, like being bumped from the Gemini 4 mission. By the time Apollo 13 rolled around, he was a seasoned space traveler, ready for his moonwalk close-up. Jack Swigert, the command module pilot, was the last-minute understudy who got called up to the big leagues. Swigert was a bachelor, an adrenaline junkie, and let's be honest, probably the only astronaut who could have been played by Kevin Bacon. The third one is Fred Hayes, the lunar module pilot. He was set to be the sixth man on the moon, and you better believe he was ready to leave his boot prints in the lunar dust. Together, Lovell, Swigert, and Hayes made a team that could handle anything space threw at them. On April 11, 1970, NASA launched a 6.2 million pound rocket from Kennedy Space Center. The crowds gathered, eyes skyward, hearts racing. Kids perched on their parents' shoulders, wondering if one day they would be the ones leaving footprints on the moon. The countdown echoed, not just across the Space Center, but across living rooms worldwide. And then, with a roar that silenced the world, the Saturn V came to life. A pillar of fire and smoke, defying gravity, defying reason, carrying more than just 3 men, it carried the dreams. As the rocket ascended, it was as if the Earth itself was giving a standing ovation. Back in mission control, you could cut the tension with a knife. Sure, they made it look easy, but every engineer knew that space travel was less like a walk in the park and more like a tightrope walk over the Niagara Falls. The first stage separated and the orbit was achieved. For a brief moment, our astronauts were part of it, floating free from the shackles of gravity, ready for the next leg of their lunar tango. 2 days into what was supposed to be NASA's third moonwalk rehearsal, the crew stirred the oxygen tanks. You know, just another day at the office. However, this was no ordinary stir. Oxygen tank number 2 had been through the ringer, dropped during installation. When the crew hit that stir switch, a spark lit up, damaged the installation inside the tank. The result? An explosion that ripped off the service module's bay cover, like it was tearing open a gift from the cosmos. And what a gift it was. No oxygen, no water, no electric power, and a free ticket to the "we might not make it" show. Then came the understatement of the century. "Houston, we've had a problem." Delivered with the calm of someone who's just spilled coffee on their shirt, not someone whose spacecraft was disintegrating around them. Lovell peered out of the window and saw their precious oxygen escaping into the void. "We are venting something out into space," he reported. In the vast silent expanse of space, the lunar module Aquarius was never meant to be anything more than a temporary home on the moon's surface. Yet, in the aftermath of Apollo 13's mid-mission calamity, this modest module, designed for lunar frolics, became the ultimate cosmic life preserver. Aquarius, with its Spartan interior and lunar dust on its mind, was suddenly thrust into the limelight. The lunar module, which had been prepped for a moonwalk, was now repurposed to support life. Actually, 3 lives hanging by a thread, 200,000 miles from home. In a spacecraft named after the water-bearer constellation, water was precisely what they were running out of. The lunar module was equipped with a life support system that was supposed to sustain 2 astronauts for a mere 45 hours, not 3 men for an extended survival thriller. With the command module's resources dwindling faster, the crew had to get creative. They rationed their supplies and were in a race against time, with carbon dioxide levels rising, temperatures dropping, and power reserves on the brink of exhaustion. The crew had to become makeshift mechanics, jury-rigging the lunar module to do what it was never designed to do, keep them alive for the long haul back to Earth. They had to coax more life out of Aquarius than anyone at NASA had ever intended, and they did it with the aplomb of seasoned improvisers. As they huddled in their aluminum cocoon, the astronauts of Apollo 13 showed us what it means to adapt to overcome and to write a survival guide on the fly. After the explosion, of course, the crew needed to perform a critical course correction, and they had to do it old school, using the stars for navigation. However, there was a tiny bit of a problem. The explosion had scattered debris around the spacecraft, making it impossible to distinguish the stars from the shiny particles. So what do you do when you can't see the stars? You use the Earth's terminator, the line between night and day on our planet, as a reference. It was a technique so unconventional that it had only been tried once before, and by none other than Jim Lovell himself during Apollo 8. I mean, talk about a déjà vu. The crew had to perform a burn, a firing of the engine, to adjust their trajectory. Normally, this would be calculated by the spacecraft's guidance computer, but with power at a premium, they had to do it manually. They were aiming for a burn that would change their velocity by 845 feet per second. The burn had to be precise. Too little and they would miss Earth, becoming a permanent addition to the solar system's collection of oddities. Too much, and they would come in too hot, turning their re-entry into a one-way ticket to a fiery end. The margin for error was razor thin, with calculations done on the fly and double-checked against the ground team. The crew used the lunar module's thrusters for the burn, which was supposed to last about 14 seconds. Only 14 seconds to correct a course that would take them 200,000 miles back to Earth. As they initiated the burn, the whole world held its breath. Newspapers flew off the presses, with bold headlines that screamed of the disaster in space. Apollo 13 in trouble, they read, as news anchors relayed the plight of the astronauts. The ground team back at Mission Control were the unsung heroes. The strategies they devised were as audacious as they were brilliant. Simulations ran non-stop, with teams of experts feeding every possible scenario through computers. The pressure they were under was immense. They had to figure out how to turn a lunar module into a lifeboat, how to stretch resources meant for a short jaunt on the moon into a 4-day survival marathon. In the end, the burn was successful. The crew managed to put Apollo 13 back on a free return trajectory, slingshotting around the moon and setting a course for home. The command module, Odyssey, was a chariot of fire, and re-entry is all about precision. The command module had to hit the atmosphere at just the right angle. The target, a corridor only about 2 degrees wide. The morning of April 15th saw the crew jettison the service module, revealing the extent of the damage for the first time. One whole side was missing, as if the spacecraft had been in a cosmic bar fight and came out on the losing end. Then came the blackout, the radio silence that accompanies every re-entry, as the spacecraft is enveloped in a sheet of plasma. For Apollo 13, this silence was supposed to last only 3 minutes, but as the seconds ticked by, 3 minutes stretched into 4 and then 5. Mission Control waited. The world waited, each second stretching into eternity. Finally, after 6 agonizing minutes, a voice crackled through the speakers. Odyssey was back from the brink, its crew alive and well. As the dust settled and Apollo 13's crew safely splashed down in the Pacific, the world exhaled in relief. However, NASA rolled up their sleeves and dove headfirst into the whys and hows of the near disaster. The Apollo 13 Review Board, chaired by Edgar M. Cartwright, spent 7 weeks dissecting the mission, poking around the service model's remains and grilling engineers. They found that the accident wasn't just a fluke, but a cocktail of design flaws and human errors. It turned out that oxygen tank number 2, the heart of the explosion, had been dropped during installation. The report had plenty of technical no-nos, damaged installation of wires, a thermostat set to fail, and a tank that didn't empty properly during testing. It was a perfect storm of mishaps that led to the tank's detonation, nearly 56 hours into the flight. Now, if we fast forward a few decades, you've got conspiracy theorists who look at Apollo 13 and say this was staged, or it's all a hoax. Imagine being terrified for your life, thinking you were about to be lost in space while slowly suffocating, and some flat earther 50 years later says it's just a conspiracy. Ha, joke's on them. The fact that we got them back safe and alive is more impressive than it would have been to see them land on the moon. And that's a wrap for today's video. The story of Apollo 13 is etched in the annals of history, not as a failed mission, but as a successful failure that showcased the indomitable human spirit. Now we'd love to hear from you. What part of the Apollo 13 story resonates with you the most? Do you have a favorite moment of ingenuity or a particular aspect of the mission that stands out? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this video useful, please like it and make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on our next videos. And as always, thank you for watching.